Welcome and happy Thursday. This is my weekly startup office hours where you can ask me absolutely anything you want about startups and innovation, from idea all the way to product market fit. Got a few great questions that were submitted that I curated back down today, including we're going to talk about for startups that are a bit further along but maybe haven't hit product market fit yet, and you got just too many customers and investors are telling you to focus down. How do you niche down? How do you pick one when it seems like you're saying no to sales? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, if you're a bit earlier on in the journey, how do you know if your niche that you're using for your go-to-market strategy is narrow enough? And we're going to talk about why I've said, because I got challenged on this, why I said not to raise money. So a little bit more of a controversial one we're gonna have a little fun with a little bit later. For those of you who are watching this on the replay, there are chapter markers down in the description, so you can kind of hop around to the questions that interest you. For those of you who are just joining us live here, go ahead and say hello. We got my friend June here. Hey, June, joining us on YouTube. Longtime fan, longtime friend there. Hello, hello. So if you do have questions, you can ask them in the chat. And I'll also say before we get started here that if you want to ever ask a question in advance to ensure that it gets on here and maybe you can expand a little bit more, you can hit up this link. It's also in the description. And you can actually write text, or you can even record a video. And if you do record a video, I will just go ahead and play your question on the air. Let's get started. So the first one here is this kind of question, and I get asked this periodically by startups a little further along. And part of the reason for that is that it's the space in which I work with my consulting company, The Right Box. And so the basic premise here is your startup, you kind of get out into market, you've got a product there, you're getting revenue, you're starting to get customers, and revenue's not an issue. Right? We got customers. Maybe the sales cycle's taking too long, who knows? But you got all these different customers. But the problem is none of the customers look alike. And so you got investors, you got mentors, everybody's telling you, you got to focus, you got to focus, you got to focus. You're like, how? I got all these customers, making sales is easy. Like, why am I going to say no to any of these sales? And so how do I do that focusing? How do I draw the line between there? Isn't that crazy? So let's spend a few minutes talking about that. And the idea here is that when you're working in a startup, the idea of focus has to do with what you need to get to in order to be able to scale. So scale is a function of predictability. Scale is a function of processes and mechanization and things like that. And so if your sales process looks different for all of your customers, if the value proposition looks different for all of your customers, then you can't really scale. It's hard to actually grow because you're going to have all your salespeople doing different things, and it's kind of ad hoc, and you're selling to whomever. And so you actually get stuck in this phase where you're just kind of selling to everybody. So I often like to quote Alexander the Great, or paraphrase him at least. He said to defend everything is to defend nothing. And I say to sell to everyone is to sell to no one. And that applies to marketing too. So that's the why. Let's talk about how you actually go about the process of doing that. And so I'm going to talk about it for 30,000 view, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper. And then we can always do another follow-up question if we want to probe at any of these pieces. So 30,000 foot view. The idea here is that we need to form an hypothesis based on the data that we have of what the scalable version of our business looks like. And then we need to find a way to test that we're on the right path for that. And then we just kind of build off of there and iterate through that loop. So let's break that down a little bit more specifically. So that was basically 3 steps. The first step here is looking at how you pick what the right hypothesis is, or the best hypothesis for the moment. And that's the key point, is for the moment, because it's probably wrong, but we need a place to start with. So we gather all the data that we have, and we start putting these into rough personas. So we have customer A, customer B. Maybe we're selling to, to businesses. Maybe we're selling also to schools. Maybe we're also selling to, direct to consumer, to parents, or something like that, with these different customer segments that we're selling to. So we start putting them in buckets and saying what they look like. And then we start looking at, okay, so what is the best group that we think is the easiest one to scale into? And so that's going to be a function of efficiency. And efficiency is always a function of 2 things. It's the difficulty of reaching the audience and the size of the audience. So if you break down these different customer groups, you can look at one and say, okay, this one has X number of people, this one has Y number of people, this one has Z number of people. And then within each of those 3, you say, okay, well, the one with X number of people, that's pretty cool. That's a lot of people. But you know what? It's really freaking difficult to get into there. Advertising is really expensive because everybody's talking at them. And it's, they're behind paywalls, like influencers and things like that. We just it's hard for us to kind of break into that. We don't know how we're going to do that. So it's really difficult. So it almost doesn't matter how big they are because it's really difficult to do that and you're going to get outspent by competitors. But then this other group, maybe they have not quite as many in the market cap there. It's not quite as big, but we actually can get in front of them because these people are actively Googling for something that our competitors aren't going for, or we have access to these because of our network, or just because of the nature of how we're going after this or whatever. And so you go, okay, well, it's most efficient to go after them, even though there's less of them, because it's easy to go after. So we figure out what is that group that we feel like we want to, that we think we have the best chance of early scaling with. And then you figure out, okay, so how do we go about and test that? What does it look like to focus in, to niche down, to narrow in on just that one customer segment? And then you go out and run an experiment based on that. And that could be doing a channel-based experiment. Would be like a version of growth hacking, where you say, okay, this is our most efficient channel. We're going to reach them through an influencer. We're going to reach them through universities. Or we're going to reach them through their workplace. We're going to reach them through our Instagram profile, whatever it is. And these are our channels. This is the most efficient one. A lot of people on, a lot of these types of customers on there, and we have a lot of audience there. We can get in front of them. Cool. And so then you run an experiment, see, does it work? If it works, kind of double down, and then you just slowly start to ignore those other audiences as you move toward this group that you can scale on. Those other ones are important signals because even though you're not going after them now, you can always pivot to them later. So if you discover that you're on the wrong path with that audience that you chose, you have other backup options that you can pivot to. But even if you don't need to pivot to them, they can also be growth opportunities, which means that you can expand outward from your current audience where you are seeing some success, and when you get some cash in, and then go into these other groups, which is pretty fantastic too. So that's the idea here, is if you're a startup and you have no trouble selling, but everybody you're selling to looks different and everybody's telling you to focus, they're telling you to focus because you need focus to have mechanization, you need mechanization to scale. And the way you do that is by finding the most efficient audience to go after now, or at least the best hypothesis of it. Then you test it quickly, test it cheaply, and then find out, are you on the right track? Double down, scale, go on that path. So that's that question. I see John's joined us. Hey, John, welcome. Welcome for joining us live here too. If you guys are having a good time, go ahead and give this a like. Helps me out. Really appreciate it. But let's move on to our next question here. So our next question is, how do I know if my niche is narrow enough? So this came from a relatively early stage startup. They don't have a product live yet, and they were saying, okay, we have what we feel is like a pretty narrow audience, and I challenged them on that. So they're asking, like, how do we know if we're narrow enough? Like, what is the criteria that we use to figure out, is this really narrow enough for us? So I want to talk about that for a quick second. So the idea behind picking a narrow niche is the exact same as what we were talking about before, is that you require focus and mechanization. And the bigger the audience that you're going after, the more diverse the audience that you're going after, the harder it is to get in front of them. The more expensive it is, the more time it takes, the more convoluted your messaging is. You have to really sell to someone, because again, selling to everybody is selling to nobody. So you have to really pick down a niche here. And so how narrow is narrow enough? Well, you want to get down to a point where there is extremely clear criteria for who's in the group and who's out of the group, such that that criteria makes it easy, or relatively easy, for you to get in front of that group. So if, as an example, one of the things we often talk about, it's an example we throw around, is like, let's say your startup was targeting really wealthy men who were born in the greater London area and live there. They love dogs and they vacation in the Swiss Alps. You're like, okay. And let's make it even more specific. Let's say that they were born in 1949. Boom, right? That sounds really, really narrow, except that audience includes both Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne, right? So it seems like you have a really specific audience, but those two people probably don't share anything else in common. So you want to get as narrow as you can to actually find out is the exact person who's feeling the pain that we are solving through our solution, and that they're narrow enough that we can actually get a message in front of them. So then you go through the same process that we just talked about, where you again figure out efficiency. What is, where on of the channels that we have access to has the most of them in there, with the easiest way for us to get on that channel and get in front of all of those people. And that's how you niche down. I can't give a number. I can't give how many criteria you need to use in order to niche down. There are lots of ways to niche down. So you can niche down by price, you can niche down by demographics, you can niche down by geography, you can niche down by interests, right? There's lots of different ways to niche down. But as far as how specific you have to get is a function of how efficient you need to get. Is how many criteria do you have to use until you get into a definition of an audience that you can actually just really get in front of? And that's what you're trying to do. So the answer that I would give is that how do you know if your niche is narrow enough? It's narrow enough, right? As you start narrowing and narrowing and narrowing and narrowing, it starts to make you uncomfortable. You're like, I'm excluding too many people. That really makes me uncomfortable. Get down to where it's so niche that it makes you uncomfortable, and then niche down again. That's the level you need to get to a point where it makes you uncomfortable. You can pivot, grow, expand later, all you want. But right now, you need to figure out, how do I get in front of one person? How do I sell one customer? How do I get money, revenue, traction, whatever, from a group of people? So you need to actually get in front of people and not try to get in front of everybody, because it probably isn't going to work. And that actually leads to our third and final question here, which was the source of why I said this. So tongue in cheek, so it was like, why are you telling me not to raise money? It's just part of the startup journey. This actually comes from a post that I made on LinkedIn. I'll put it in the description, but here I'll throw it into the chat for those of you who are here live. And the idea behind this LinkedIn post was that I was saying that for early stage startups, don't worry about trying to get funding from investors. Instead, try to get funding from your customers. That was my core message. And the idea was that we have this story that we tell ourselves and that we tell others about how startups work, and that the way that they work is that we get some idea and we get a little evidence maybe, but we get this idea and then we go raise money so that we can build it, because we need people, we need engineers, maybe we need marketing people or sales people, we need advertising dollars, we need manufacturing dollars, whatever it is. So we're going to go out and raise some money from angel investors, eventually from VCs, whatever. We're going to get this cash in, we're going to build some shit, and then we're going to go launch some shit, and it's all going to be cool, right? And that's the story that we tell ourselves. And the hockey stick graph is based on that, is that you got, maybe some early evidence and you raise money, and that leads you to unlock all these amazing sales. And it's not that that's wrong. It's just, it can be really misleading because what's baked into that is the psychology that's wrong of that the only way to get things done, in other words, the only way to build that stuff, to market, to sell, to get in front of customers by advertising or whatever, is by having cash, and cash being the thing we don't have. It's what we need to go get. That's what's wrong, is that there's almost always a way to get in front of customers, to get things out into market without actually going through that. And there are some exceptions. Pharmaceuticals are, for example, an exception to that. Med tech is sometimes an exception to that. There are others as well where it's about development or manufacturing of some IP. But even there are some big exceptions to that. But I'm going to set those aside for a moment and talk to the 99% of startups that don't fit into that category. So what we want to do is figure out, like, how do we change that path around? Right. So the reason that you don't want to try to go get funding from investors right away is twofold. One, you're probably not going to be able to do it. If you are an experienced founder with a couple of exits, then you're in a much better position here. But if you're not in that category, you're not really fundable, because you don't have this credible theory of hugeness yet. And so you're probably not going to be able to raise money anyway. And the second is you're targeting the wrong thing. You're targeting this if we build it, they will come type mentality. And you're probably not thinking that. You're probably thinking, oh, I got this down to a really narrow MVP, and I'm not trying to build this big thing. I got really niched down to this narrow thing, and I just want to build this, and that takes, only 50K, or it only takes 500K or whatever in order to do that. So you're probably thinking you got it really niched down, but you're still doing that. You're still saying, I'm here, I want to get there. There's a chasm in between. Money bridges the chasm. But that's just usually not true. So you want to turn the question around and say, what would it look like to, if we just reverse engineer, say, build something even smaller than that? Find a co-founder who can help you build that thing. Or what if instead of building that thing, you just actually hacked something together out of spare parts so that you could get something in front of somebody? Instead of hacking something out of spare parts, what if you just leverage no code tools so that you didn't even have to get any technical talent involved at all, and you could put this thing together using no code tools? Or what if before that, you just built some clickable prototype in Figma or Keynote or Google Slides or whatever? Or what if even before that, you just started doing sales and got letters of intent and the like from customers, right? Doing all those kinds of things allows you to get to revenue without ever having to do the raise in the first place. And so you're targeting the thing that's going to be most likely to make you succeed, which is the early acquisition of customers. So your goals are aligned with what is the greatest predictor of long-term success in a startup, which is the early acquisition of customers. And you're getting early market feedback, which makes you stronger as a product. And you're not targeted toward this big front-loaded risk of let's build something bigger and get investment for it. You're not introducing all of this outside pressure. And as John was pointing out in the chat, if you get revenue, you're not really having the problem of dilution, right? When you raise outside funding, you're actually decreasing your personal value in the startup. And that's unavoidable in many, many circumstances, particularly when you get to large scale where you may need a huge amount of cash. But it's not absolutely unavoidable. And early on in a startup, it's pretty avoidable. So don't unnecessarily dilute, go after revenue. John's totally right. And June, talk about bootstrapping on a shoestring. Yes, exactly. Like if you whatever resources you have, that's what you want to put into your startup. Is what do I have that I can put into this? We often call that our activatable resources. This is the idea that we all are different in that space. Every single company, whether you're a one-person startup and you're just just a college student or whatever, and eating ramen because you have a side job and that's kind of it, right? All the way to a multinational company, you still have activatable resources. There's some amount of money. It might be measured in pennies, it might be measured in billions, but you have some amount of money. You have some amount of access to people, right? These could be your friends early on. They're people who will do you a favor, or they could just be yourself. You could be really lonely, right? And if you're a really big company, then you might have whole teams or divisions that you can kind of throw at this. You might have different levels of activatable resources for that. Time is a factor as well. You might have a small amount of time to spend in a week, or you might have a huge amount of time to spend in a week. And there are all other kinds of resources, technical capabilities and all that. So everybody has some set of activatable resources. What you want to do is try to find a way to get to a first customer within those resources that you have. You want to launch now, launch quickly, launch soon, even if launching is really just conversations getting you toward letters of intent and not actually building anything, because you don't necessarily have to build in order to get revenue, right? So that's that. So I'm definitely not saying don't ever raise money, because that's foolhardy and silly. But what I am saying is that when you're really early on, you don't want to worry about funding from investors. You want to worry about funding from customers. And that is the idea. I put this in another LinkedIn post. I'll also put in the chat. And the idea here is that when we're talking about the process of getting early stage customers before you really have a product, you go through this cycle that really experienced, really good founders know already. And that is that, so like if you have a really early stage startup founder who maybe hasn't done this before, doesn't have a huge amount of education in this space, which I don't mean formal education, I just mean like boot camps and startup weekends and that kind of thing. Then they go, okay, I know what my customers want. I'm going to go build that thing and we're going to be great. Like that's the thing. Then the intermediate startup founder, once they get a little bit more experience in the process, they don't do that anymore. They say, okay, I actually need to go talk to customers. So I'm going to ask customers what they want. So they go and figure out like, okay, people say they want this, people say they want that. I put that into a thing and, then ask some questions, get some validation, and then go build it. Pretty cool. Certainly better than just assuming you know what your customers want. But then there's even further step where the advanced startup founder will then go out and say, actually, customers don't always know how to articulate what they want. They don't always know exactly what they want, but they're experiencing some pain that I think I can solve. So I'm actually going to go out and discover what they want. I'm going to run experiments and I'm going to do all different kinds of tests that I can run, these validation tests and discovery tests. I'm going to figure out what customers want and not rely on them having to tell me exactly what they want. Because in order for them to tell me what they want, I have to know what question to ask, and I might not know exactly what question to ask. So let's instead find a way to discover what they want. That's the advanced way of doing it. And that's how you get the better revenue early on. So the beginning founder, like they know what their customers want. You have the intermediate founder who asks customers what they want. You have the advanced founder who discovers what customers want. And then there's the elite master level above that, which is instead of just even discovering what customers want, they co-create whatever the product is with their customers. They co-create it. What that means is you start early on, day one, focusing entirely on the customer and trying to get customers. So that's where you look at, how do I get customers in the door right away? And then you grow over time with them by building something in line with the market. So you and the market grow together into a place. That's the master level of a startup founder. And that's where you can get if you focus not on funding, because funding requires a target and a goal, but instead on customers. Focus on getting revenue from customers from day one, and you're much more likely to succeed. So those are the questions I really want to hit today. If you have questions that you want me to address on here, you can again hit up this link. It's in the description. And you can ask a question in text, in audio, or even in video. And if you do a video question, I'll play it on here so that everybody else can see it. It's a nice way to expand on your point instead of trying to work in the little chat. Otherwise, I will see you guys next Thursday. I'm here every Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific, answering your questions. I hope to see you soon. And definitely, if you're following me on YouTube right now, give a subscribe so that you can get notified when these happen, or just connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'll talk to you guys soon. See you next week. Have a great one. Peace.